The advertisement in the Dunmore Gazette was not the kind of advertisement that appeared in the Dunmore Gazette very often. Most of the advertisements in that paper concerned farm sales and lost cattle, and the services of tradesmen who had recently established themselves in the county and wished the county to know about it. This advertisement was 3 lines long and said only that a person was required with knowledge of the care of large dogs, specifically hounds, for a period of some weeks, that the work would be residential, that the pay was fair, and that inquiries should be directed to the steward at Ashefield, which was the great estate, 7 miles north of Dunmore, that most people in the county knew about and few had seen the inside of. The name of the Duke of Ashefield did not appear in the advertisement. It did not need to. Everyone in the county knew that Ashefield meant the Duke, and the Duke meant the man who had come into the title 6 years ago on the death of his father, and who had been at Ashefield more or less continuously since, which was unusual for a man of his age and rank, and which the county had decided, after considerable discussion, meant one of 2 things: either that he was devoted to the land and the estate in a way that was admirable, though somewhat unsociable, or that he was hiding from something, and the county could not agree on which of these it was, and had eventually settled on the more interesting of the 2, which was the hiding. What he was hiding from, the county had decided, was the world. He had been engaged 6 years ago, at the same time he came into the title, to a young woman of good family whom the county had approved of, and who had broken the engagement after 4 months for reasons that had never been made entirely clear, and which the county had therefore made entirely unclear in a dozen different directions simultaneously, all of which agreed on one point, which was that the Duke had not recovered from it, and that the not recovering was why he was at Ashefield and not in London, and not at the assemblies, and not, as a man of his age and fortune and reasonable appearance ought to be, looking for a wife. The county said he had no heart left to give. It said this with the mixture of sympathy and satisfaction that counties bring to the romantic misfortunes of their dukes. And it repeated it regularly enough that it had become the kind of thing that people said without examining whether they believed it, because it had been said so many times that it had the quality of fact, and facts, once established in a county, are very difficult to revise. Martha Gale did not read the Dunmore Gazette as a rule, but her landlady did, and had left it open on the kitchen table on a Thursday morning, and Martha had seen the advertisement while she was eating her breakfast, and had read it twice, and had thought about it for the rest of the morning, and had written the letter of inquiry in the afternoon. She was 24, and she had grown up on the edge of the county, in a village too small to be on most maps, the daughter of a man who had kept dogs his whole life, working dogs and hunting dogs, and the occasional dog of no particular category that he had taken in because it needed taking in, and had stayed because it suited both parties. Her father had been the best person with animals she had ever seen, which was saying something, because she had seen a considerable number of people with animals over the years, and she had learned everything he knew, which was a great deal, and had added to it the things she had worked out herself in the years since he died, which were also a considerable number. She was not a trained veterinary. There were almost no trained veterinary women in the county, and she did not expect there to be any, but she had nursed dogs through distemper, and through broken limbs, and through the various afflictions that dogs accumulate over a working life, and she had done it with a success rate that the farmers and huntsmen in her village had noticed and made use of, and the using of it had given her a small income that was not sufficient on its own, but which, combined with the work she did at the draper's in Dunmore, made a life that was functional, if not comfortable. The Hound at Ashefield, she learned from the steward's reply to her letter, was a deerhound named Corin, 11 years old, which was old for a deerhound, who had been the Duke's own dog since the Duke was 22, and who had developed in the past month a condition of the joints that was making it difficult for him to rise and walk, and which had progressed to the point where the estate's groom, who ordinarily looked after the dogs, felt it was beyond his competence, and which the Duke wished to have attended to by someone with more specific knowledge. The letter said the position was residential, and the pay was as the advertisement had stated, and that she should come on a Monday if she was willing. She was willing. She came on the Monday with a small bag and the particular combination of confidence and uncertainty that she always felt going into a new situation, which was the confidence of knowing she could do the work and the uncertainty of not knowing yet what the work would actually require, which were two different things, and which she had learned to hold simultaneously without letting one undermine the other. She was met at the side entrance by the steward, a man named Voss, who was efficient and not unkind, and who showed her to a room in the servants' quarters that was small and clean and had a window facing south, and who took her to the stable block where the dogs were kept and showed her Corin. The deerhound was in a large pen at the end of the stable block, lying on deep straw on his side, and he was the largest dog Martha had ever seen up close, which was saying something, a great grey shaggy animal with a long narrow head and the particular bones of a hound built for speed over distance, and he was lying with the stillness of an animal that has learned that stillness is the only position that does not hurt. He looked at her when she came in. He did not get up, and he did not wag, and he did not make any sound. He only looked, and she stood in the pen doorway and looked back at him and let him look at her for as long as he needed, because she had learned from her father that animals in pain are making a constant assessment of whether the people around them are safe, and that the assessment cannot be hurried. She crouched down after a moment, not approaching, just lower, and she said quietly, "There you are then," in the voice she used with animals, which was the same as her ordinary voice, only slower, and the hound looked at her for another long moment, and then put his head back down on the straw with the careful movement of an animal managing its own discomfort. She spent the first day observing. She did not attempt to treat anything, or to move the dog, or to do anything beyond sitting with him in the pen for several hours, which was not doing nothing. It was doing the most important thing, which was establishing that she was not a threat and was not going to demand anything of him that he could not give. And by the evening of the first day, the hound had shifted himself to be marginally closer to the side of the pen where she was sitting, which was not nothing, which was in fact the beginning of the thing she needed. Voss came to check on her at 4, and she told him what she had observed, which was that the condition was in the hips and the lower spine, and that there was also some swelling in the right foreleg that would need addressing, and that she would need certain supplies from the village, which she listed, and that she would need access to warm water twice daily, and clean rags, and a particular kind of oil that she used for the joint inflammation, and which she had brought with her. Voss wrote the list, and said he would have the supplies by morning. He said, "His Grace will want to know the prognosis." She said, "It is too early to say." He said, "His Grace will ask." She said, "Then tell him it is too early to say, and that I will have a better understanding in a week." Voss looked at her with the expression of a man who was not accustomed to being told to relay uncertain answers to the Duke. She said, "I can only tell him what I know, which is not yet very much. Tell him that." Voss went away. The Duke came the following morning. She was in the pen with Corin, working on the foreleg swelling with the oil and the warm cloths, and she heard the stable block door, and heard footsteps, and looked up. He was not what she had expected, although she had not precisely formed an expectation, only absorbed the county's version of him, which was a man diminished by loss, and he was not diminished. He was tall and dark-coated, and his face was the kind that the county would have called closed, and that she identified, from her considerable experience of creatures in pain, as careful. He was careful with his face, the way the hound was careful with its movements. Not because the expression was not there, but because the expression had learned the cost of being shown freely and had adjusted accordingly. He came to the pen gate and looked in. He looked at her first, and then at the dog, and she watched the looking at the dog, because that was what she needed to see, and what she saw was what she had hoped she would see, which was that the looking was personal. He was not looking at a sick animal. He was looking at a particular animal, his animal, the specific dog that was his, and the looking had in it everything the county had said he did not have, which was a heart, a working and attached heart, fully in evidence in the way a man looks at the creature he loves when the creature is hurting and he cannot fix it. She said, "Good morning, Your Grace." He said, "How is he?" She said, "The inflammation in the foreleg is reducing. The hip is harder." He said, "Will he walk again?" She said, "I believe so. With time. I cannot promise it, and I will not, until I am more certain." He said, "Voss said you required a week to assess." She said, "Yes." He said, "And if at the end of the week the assessment is not encouraging," she said, "then I will tell you what I know honestly, and we will discuss what the options are." He looked at the dog. He said, "He is 11. She said, "Yes." He said, "That is old for a deerhound." She said, "It is." It is not, however, the end of a deerhound's useful life, if the condition is managed correctly. He said, "And can it be managed?" She said, "That is what I am here to find out." He looked at her again. He said, "You speak plainly." She said, "I find it is the most useful way to speak about a sick animal." He said, "Yes." He crouched down at the pen gate, which she had not expected from a duke, which was not the kind of thing that dukes generally did in stable blocks, and he put his hand through the gate, and Corin, who had not moved for her approach for the better part of a day, lifted his head and put his long muzzle against the duke's palm, and she watched this and felt the particular feeling she always felt when she saw an animal trust a person, which was not sentimental, but was something real, the recognition of a fact about the person that the animal had already assessed, and she was only now confirming. She said, "He knows you." He said, "I have had him since he was 8 weeks old." She said, "How long ago?" He said, "Nearly 12 years. She did the arithmetic. She said, "Then you had him before the title." He said, "Yes." He said, "He has been the most consistent thing in my life for 12 years." He said it simply and without any apparent awareness of how much it said, and she received it the same way, which was as a plain fact, and also as the answer to a question the county had been asking in the wrong way for 6 years. He stayed for 20 minutes. He came the following morning, and the morning after that, at the same time, 8 o'clock, and he crouched at the pen gate and put his hand through, and Corin came to him, slowly and with the careful management of pain, but came, and Martha watched this each morning and worked on the foreleg and on the hip with the oil and the warm cloths and the slow gentle movement that was the only kind of movement she would put the dog through. And at the end of the first week, she told the Duke that the foreleg was substantially better and the hip was improving, and that she believed the dog would walk again without significant pain if the treatment continued for another 3 to 4 weeks. He said, "Then you will stay another 3 to 4 weeks." She said, "If that is what is required." He said, "It is what is required." She stayed. The days fell into a shape that was determined by the dog and by what the dog needed, which was the warm cloths twice daily, and the oil, and the slow movement, and the sitting with him. And the sitting with him was not the least of these, because Corin was a dog who had been active his whole life, and the enforced stillness was its own kind of suffering, and the best thing Martha could do in the hours between the treatments was to be in the pen with him, talking or not talking, and she was good at both. She talked to him the way her father had taught her to talk to animals, which was honestly and without condescension, telling him what she was going to do before she did it, and why she thought it would help. And she was aware that the dog did not understand the words, and she said it anyway, because the voice was the point, the steady, unhurried voice that said, "I am here, and I am not going to hurt you, and we are going to do this together." The Duke came every morning at 8. After the first week, he also came in the afternoons, at various times, not at a fixed hour, and she understood from this that the morning visits were deliberate and the afternoon visits were impulse, which told her something about him that the careful face did not. He began to stay longer. The visits that had been 20 minutes became 30, then 40, and he would sit on the low bench outside the pen, and she would be in the pen with the dog, and they would talk, sometimes about the dog, sometimes about other things. He asked her about her father, which she had mentioned in passing when she described how she had learned the work, and she told him about the dogs her father had kept, and the things she had learned from watching him, and he listened with the same quality of attention she had identified in him from the first morning, which was that when he was listening, he was entirely listening and not doing something else behind it. She asked him about Corin, about the 12 years, and he told her, not in a rush, but in the way that things come out when the person who wants to tell them has been waiting for someone to ask. He told her about the day he got the dog, which was 3 months before his father died, and 6 months before he came into the title, and about the particular way the puppy had looked at him the first time, which was with a confidence that he said he had not quite understood and had spent 12 years trying to live up to. She said, "Did you?" He said, "Some days." She said, "What kind of days?" He said, "The days when he trusted me to make the right decision, and I made it." She said, "And the other days?" He said, "He seemed to forgive those as well, which I found more difficult to accept than the trust." She thought about this. She said, "Animals are better at forgiveness than people are." He said, "Yes." He said, "They do not keep accounts." She said, "They keep a different kind of account. They keep track of whether you are safe and whether you are honest." He said, "That sounds like a better system." She said, "It is simpler." He said, "Not the same as better." She said, "No, but in the case of the things that matter, it often comes to the same thing." He looked at the dog, who was lying with his head on Martha's knee in the way he had begun to do in the second week, and he said, "He trusts you." She said, "I have been honest with him about everything I have done and why." He said, "You have been honest with me too." She said, "It seemed the right approach." He said, "Most people are not." He said it without self-pity and without accusation, only as an observation, and she received it as an observation and said, "I know." He said, "How do you know?" She said, "I can tell when people are being careful with the truth around a sick animal. They say it will be fine when they do not know it will be fine, because they think it is kinder." He said, "And is it?" She said, "Not usually. It is kinder in the moment and unkind in the long run, because the person receiving the careful truth has arranged themselves for one outcome and is then required to rearrange for another, and the rearranging is harder than the honest assessment would have been." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I was given a great deal of careful truth 6 years ago." She did not ask for more, and he did not offer more, but they both understood what he meant, And she said, "Yes, I thought perhaps you had been." He said, "How did you know?" She said, "The careful face." He said, "I did not know I had a careful face." She said, "You do." He said, "And my dog." She said, "Your dog does not have a careful face." He almost smiled. It was not quite a smile, and it was brief, but it was the most unguarded thing she had seen from him, and she noted it, without making anything of it, except noting it. She said, "Corin is going to be a good deal more comfortable by the end of the month than he is now." He said, "I know. I can see it already." He said, "What you have done for him in 3 weeks is more than the groom managed in 3 months." She said, "The groom did not have the training for it." He said, "And you do." She said, "My father had the training for it, and he gave it to me." He said, "A valuable inheritance." She said, "More valuable than money, which is what most people inherit." He said, "You did not." She said, "No." He said, "I am sorry for it." She said, "I am not." She said, "Money is a simpler problem than knowledge." He said, "Simpler how?" She said, "Money either exists or it does not, and if it does not, you can identify what you need to do to get it. Knowledge that does not exist in you is harder to locate and harder to acquire, and the absence of it is not always obvious until you need it and do not have it." She said, "I have the knowledge. The money is a simpler problem." He looked at her for a long time. He said, "That is not how most people think about it." She said, "I am not most people." He said, "No." He said it with the particular quality he gave to one-word answers, which was complete, not a conversation ender, but a full response. And she had learned over the weeks that his one-word answers were the ones that meant the most. She told him, at the end of the 3rd week, that Corin could begin to walk on a lead, short distances, slow pace, once daily. He was there the first morning she took the dog out, standing in the stable yard, and she had the dog on a long, soft lead, and she walked slowly around the yard, and Corin moved with the careful gait of an animal, relearning how to be in its own body, and the Duke walked beside her, not touching, not interfering, only there, and the dog looked up at him once in the walking, and wagged slowly, once, the most effort the dog had yet made in the direction of joy, and the Duke looked at the wag, and she did not look at his face, because it was not her moment to look at his face. The walks continued. Every morning she took the dog around the stable yard, and every morning the Duke was there and walked beside her, and the yard became familiar in the way of spaces in which something is practiced daily, worn smooth by the repetition of it, and the conversation in the yard was the same as the conversation in the pen, which was the conversation of 2 people who had stopped performing for each other because the dog had never required a performance and had set the standard for the whole enterprise. In the 4th week, she told him the hip was sound. She had pressed and tested it that morning with the careful, systematic assessment she did twice weekly, and she could find no remaining significant inflammation, and the mobility was close to what it had been. And she came to find the Duke in his study for the first time, because Voss had told her where it was, and she did not wait for the morning visit, because this was not a thing that should wait. She knocked and came in, and he looked up from the desk and she said, "The hip is sound." He was still for a moment. He said, "Sound." She said, "He will need to continue with the daily walks and the oil treatment for another 2 weeks, and then a gradual return to his ordinary activity. But the inflammation is gone, and the mobility has returned, and he is not in significant pain any longer." He said, "You are certain?" She said, "I would not have come to tell you if I were not certain." He said, "No." He said, "You would not." He looked at the desk for a moment, and then he looked at her, and she thought she would finally see the full version of whatever it was that the careful face had been managing for 6 years, and she did see it, and it was not complicated. It was only a man who had been told he had no heart left to give, and had believed it, and had just been shown that this was not true, by a woman who sat in a pen with his dog for 4 weeks, and talked to the dog honestly, and walked the dog slowly around the stable yard in the mornings, and said, "I would not have come to tell you if I were not certain." He said, "Miss Gale." She said, "Yes." He said, "How long will you need to complete the final 2 weeks of treatment?" She said, 2 weeks. He said, "And after that," she said, "he will be able to manage on his own, with the groom watching for any recurrence." He said, "The groom." She said, "I will show the groom what to watch for." He said, "And you will go back to Dunmore." She said, "Yes." He said, "To the drapers." She said, "Yes." He said, "That is the work you do when you are not nursing sick hounds." She said, "That is the work that pays the rent when there is not a sick hound to nurse." He said, "I see." He was quiet. He said, "Miss Gale, I find that the estate has a position that has been vacant for some time." She said, "What position?" He said, "The management of the kennels, which is more than the groom can cover with his other responsibilities, and which requires exactly the kind of knowledge you have, and which pays considerably more than either the nursing of sick hounds or the selling of cloth." She looked at him. She said, "The position is residential." He said, "Yes." She said, "At Ashefield?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Your Grace." He said, "Yes." She said, "That is either a very honest offer or a very roundabout way of saying something else." He said, "It is an honest offer." He said, "And it is also a roundabout way of saying something else, and the something else is that the position would give us the opportunity to have the conversation that I find I would like to have, which is not the conversation about the kennels." She said, "What is the conversation?" He said, "The one about the careful face which you identified in the first week, and about the 12 years, and about the county, which I suspect has told you that I have no heart left to give." She said, "It has." He said, "What do you think?" She said, "I think the county has been looking at the careful face and drawing conclusions about what is behind it, which is the same mistake people make with animals in pain, which is to see the management of the pain and mistake it for the absence of feeling." He said, "And if the feeling is present," she said, "then the county is wrong, which counties often are." He said, "Yes." He said, "Miss Gale, I am not going to pretend that the position in the kennels is not also a reason for you to stay, that is outside the kennels, because you have already identified it, and I am not going to be careful with you." She said, "I know you are not going to be careful with me." He said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because you have not been careful with me for 4 weeks, and the careful face is for people you do not trust, and you trust me." He said, "Yes." He said, "I trusted you from the morning you sat in the pen and waited for the dog to decide about you." She said, "Most people do not wait." He said, "No." He said, "You waited because you understood that his assessment mattered and that it could not be hurried." She said, "Yes." He said, "I had the same feeling about you, as it happens." She said, "I know." She said it the way she said things, plainly, and he looked at her the way he looked at the dog, on the mornings when the dog walked across the stable yard and wagged, which was as though the thing he was looking at was exactly what it was, and more than he had allowed himself to expect. And she thought about the county, and what it said about a man with no heart left to give, and she thought the county had been describing the careful face, and had missed entirely the thing behind it, which was present and real, and had been present and real for 4 weeks every morning at 8 o'clock, and every afternoon at an unscheduled hour, when the impulse was stronger than the deliberateness, and she thought that this was the thing about careful people, that when they showed you what was under the careful face, it was not diminished by the care, but amplified by it, because everything that had been held back came forward at once, and it was a great deal, she said. The kennel's position, he said. Yes, she said. I will consider it, he said. And the other thing, she said. I am considering that as well, he said. How long will the considering take? She said. About as long as the hip took, he said. 4 weeks, she said. Less than that. I already have the assessment, he said. And, she said, I will tell you when I am certain, which will not be long, because I am already almost certain, and I do not make people wait longer than is necessary, when the answer is already close to what it is going to be. He said, that is a very precise way of saying something. She said, I find it is the most useful way. She went back to the stable block, and she sat with Corin for the rest of the morning, and she talked to him in her father's voice, steady and honest and unhurried, and the dog put his head on her knee, and she put her hand on the great grey head, and outside the stable block the estate went about its business, and the county went about its conclusions, and she sat in the warm straw with the hound who had trusted her in the first week, and thought about careful faces and what was behind them, and about a man who had been told for 6 years that he had nothing left, and who had in fact been full of it the whole time, only full of it quietly, the way a field is full of water, in the dry season, underground, invisible from the surface, waiting for the right conditions to come back to the light, and she thought that she was, perhaps, the right conditions, and that the dog had known this before either of them had, which was not surprising, because the dog did not keep accounts, and did not have a careful face, and had simply looked at her on the first morning, and made his assessment, and been right, and she was, after all, her father's daughter, and her father's daughter did not give an animal reason to be wrong about her, and she was not going to start now. Thank you for listening to this story, all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from, and what the story made you feel. Do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next one.